The quiet suburban neighborhood was unusually still that morning. The air hung heavy, weighed down by a sorrow that seemed to seep into every corner of the small house on Maple Street. Stan stood outside, his breath forming thin clouds in the chilly autumn air. His fingers, roughened by years of hard work, trembled slightly as he held the worn photograph of his late wife, Mary. Mary had been the anchor of their family. For 25 years, she was the steady heart beating beneath their roof, kind, patient, and endlessly loving. Even in the hardest times, her smile had a way of calming the storm. But now, that smile was frozen forever in a picture, a memory that felt impossibly fragile. Stan's face was lined with grief and exhaustion. The loss of Mary had hit him harder than he ever imagined. After the funeral arrangements were made, the house felt emptier than ever, as if the walls themselves mourned alongside him. Their son, Michael, was supposed to be there, standing by his father's side, sharing the weight of loss. A son's presence at his mother's funeral seemed like a given, an unspoken promise. But as the hours passed, Stan's hope for that comfort slowly began to wither. He sat quietly in the dim living room, surrounded by the scent of lilies and the faint echo of past laughter. His phone remained silent. Outside, the sun climbed higher, indifferent to the ache within. In his mind, Stan replayed every conversation, every moment he and Michael shared in recent months. He remembered the distance growing between them, small disagreements turning into cold silences, busy schedules masking something deeper, something broken. But nothing had prepared him for what came next. When the message finally arrived, it hit like a punch to the chest. The screen on Stan's phone lit up. A message from Michael. His heart pounded as he unlocked it, hoping for words of comfort, a promise that his son would be there. But instead, the message was cold, short, and unforgiving. "Dad, I can't make it today. It's Jenny's birthday. We'll talk later." Stan's breath caught in his throat. Jenny, Michael's wife. Her birthday. Of all days. He reread the message, disbelief mixing with a deep, gnawing pain. His own son had chosen to celebrate a party over the funeral of his mother, Stan's beloved Mary. The room felt suddenly suffocating. The bouquet of lilies on the table seemed to wither before his eyes. The sound of distant traffic, once normal, now echoed like a cruel reminder of how alone he had become. He sat back, hands trembling, trying to process the betrayal. Michael was the last person he expected to disappoint him like this. A son should honor his mother's memory, no matter the cost. But Michael's choice was clear, and it cut deeper than any words could. Stan's mind raced through a storm of emotions: anger, sorrow, confusion, and a profound sense of loss. Not just for Mary, but for the son he thought he knew. For a long moment, silence filled the room. The clock ticked relentlessly, measuring the growing distance between father and son. Memories flooded back. Michael as a boy, clinging to his mother's hand, laughing at family dinners, promising never to forget what mattered most. How could that boy have vanished, replaced by this indifferent man? Stan's throat tightened as he realized the funeral was starting without Michael. His heart ached not just for the goodbye he never got to say, but for the fracture growing in his family. Outside, the sky darkened with the coming evening. Inside, Stan's grief was only just beginning to deepen. He knew one thing with painful certainty: this was not the end of their story. The house was eerily silent now, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of emotions inside Stan's heart. He sat alone at the kitchen table, the dim light casting long shadows on the walls. The clock ticked steadily, each second dragging like an unrelenting reminder of the day's events, a day that Michael had chosen to abandon. Stan's hands clenched into fists. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, mixing with a deep, gnawing pain he couldn't shake. How could his own son be so careless? So selfish? The thought of Michael laughing and celebrating, while Mary's casket was lowered into the cold earth, felt like a cruel betrayal. Yet beneath the rage was confusion. Stan tried to understand Michael's choice, the pull of loyalty to a wife, the desire to celebrate life even in the shadow of death. But no explanation could soften the blow. Memories of better times flickered in his mind: family dinners filled with laughter, Michael's childhood dreams, Mary's warm embrace. He had hoped their bond was unbreakable. Now it felt fragile, slipping through his fingers like sand. Stan's phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't a message from Michael. It was a call from an old friend, someone who had seen the cracks forming in their family. Stan didn't answer. He wasn't ready to talk, not yet. Instead, he stood and moved toward the window, staring out at the fading light. The world outside went on as usual, indifferent to his pain. He felt isolated, a man betrayed not just by loss, but by the very blood that was supposed to bind him. A cold resolve began to take root. If Michael wasn't going to honor his mother, then Stan would find another way to make him understand. Not with words, those had failed. But with actions. The night deepened, and with it, Stan's quiet determination grew stronger. This was no longer just grief. It was the beginning of something else. A reckoning. The next morning, Stan sat at the kitchen table, nursing a black coffee that had long since gone cold. His mind was a whirlwind, but one thought stood clear: Jenny. Michael's wife. The woman whose birthday had taken precedence over his mother's funeral. He knew very little about Jenny, only what Michael had told him over the years. She was young, vibrant, and ambitious, a woman who loved to celebrate life in grand fashion. But now, her birthday was the wedge driving a deep crack between father and son. Stan pulled out his phone and hesitated before scrolling through social media. There it was, photos of Jenny's birthday party, smiling faces, laughter, champagne flowing freely. Michael was there, wrapped in the celebration, completely absent from the mourning his father was enduring. A bitter anger surged through Stan. How could she be so indifferent? How could Michael let her overshadow the woman who had given him life? Stan's memories shifted. He recalled the subtle signs of tension between Michael and Mary in recent years. Jenny's presence had changed the family dynamic, replacing old traditions with new, less respectful ones. His thoughts darkened. Jenny was more than just a party planner or a wife who demanded attention. She was the symbol of everything that had pulled Michael away, that had fractured the family. For a moment, Stan's resolve hardened. If Michael refused to honor Mary, if Jenny was the cause of the betrayal, then they both would have to face the consequences. The quiet kitchen felt colder now, the weight of loss mingling with a rising storm of revenge. Stan knew that the road ahead would be painful, not just for Michael, but for everyone involved. Because some wounds don't heal with time. They fester. Stan stared at his phone, fingers hovering hesitantly over the screen. He knew he needed to reach out to Michael, to try to bridge the widening gap before it became an unfixable chasm. But the sting of betrayal made every word feel heavy, every thought tangled in anger and disappointment. Finally, with a shaky breath, he dialed. The phone rang twice before Michael's voice answered, distant and guarded. "Hey, Dad," Michael said, his tone flat. "Michael, I wanted to talk." "About yesterday," Stan began, voice strained. There was a pause, then a sharp sigh. "Dad, I already told you. It was Jenny's birthday. I couldn't miss it." Stan clenched his jaw. "Your mother died, Michael. We needed you. I needed you." Michael's voice hardened. "I have my own life now. Jenny's my family." The words hit Stan like a punch. He fought the urge to argue, to shout, to make Michael see the pain he caused. But something held him back, a flicker of the son he once knew. "Can we meet? Just to talk?" Stan asked quietly. "I don't know, Dad. I'm busy." The line went dead. Stan lowered the phone slowly, feeling the weight of rejection settle over him. His attempts to reach out were met with cold indifference. The son he loved had built walls too high to climb. That night, alone in his dim living room, Stan stared at the family photos lining the walls, images of happier times. Each one felt like a reminder of what was slipping away. But beneath the sorrow, a new resolve took root. If words failed, then actions would speak louder. Michael had made his choice. Now, Stan would make his. The quiet moments alone in the house were the hardest for Stan. Every corner seemed to echo with memories of Mary, her laughter, her gentle touch, the way she always knew how to bring peace when storms brewed inside the family. He pulled out an old photo album from the dusty shelf, fingers tracing the faded edges of the pictures. There was Mary, smiling brightly on their wedding day. There was Michael as a toddler, his tiny hand wrapped around Mary's finger. And there were countless family moments, frozen in time, full of warmth and love. Stan closed his eyes and let the memories wash over him. The quiet evenings Mary spent baking with Michael, the soft lullabies she sang when he was a boy, the way she held them both together through good times and bad. Those memories were bittersweet now. They reminded Stan of everything he'd lost, not just Mary's presence, but the unity of their family. He thought about Michael's absence at the funeral, the choice to celebrate Jenny's birthday instead of honoring his mother's final farewell. It felt like a wound that refused to heal. Yet, amid the pain, Stan found strength in Mary's memory. She had always stood for family, for loyalty, and for love that endured. He whispered softly, as if Mary could hear him, "I'll make sure they remember what family means." With renewed determination, Stan set the photo album aside. The time for sorrow was fading. The time for reckoning was coming. Days passed, but Stan's heart remained heavy, weighed down not just by grief but by a growing fire inside him. The pain of losing Mary was compounded by the sting of betrayal. Michael's absence on the day that should have united them had cut deeper than any wound. The house was quiet now, but inside Stan, a storm was brewing. He paced the living room late at night, memories and anger colliding in his mind. He knew that words had failed. Michael's cold refusal to stand with them had left no room for forgiveness. Not yet. Stan's gaze hardened as he made a decision. If Michael wouldn't respect the family, then he would teach him a lesson he wouldn't forget. This wasn't about hatred. It was about justice. About respect. About making Michael understand the weight of his choice. Stan began to plan carefully. He wouldn't act impulsively. This would be calculated, deliberate. Something to shake Michael's world, just enough to make him see what he had lost. In the quiet of his study, Stan pulled out a notebook and started writing down ideas. Small disruptions, truths to reveal, consequences to deliver. This was the beginning of a reckoning. The father who had always been quiet and reserved was now preparing to fight in a way Michael never expected. And this fight would change everything. Stan knew that revenge wasn't a path to be taken lightly. It wasn't about petty payback or childish retaliation. No, this was about making Michael feel the weight of his choices, to awaken a conscience that seemed asleep. The kind of lesson that would carve itself into memory forever. He spent days watching Michael's routines from a distance, quietly observing his son's life, his work, his social circle. Michael had become comfortably distant, wrapped in the bubble of his new life with Jenny. The more Stan saw, the clearer it became. Michael had forgotten who he was, and what family truly meant. Stan's first move was subtle, nothing dramatic, just a whisper in the background of Michael's carefully constructed world. It began with small inconveniences, delays that seemed accidental, missed calls from important contacts, quiet rumors sown in places Michael frequented. Stan had learned long ago how to be patient, how to work in the shadows. He called a few old friends who still respected him, asking them to casually mention things to Michael. Nothing harmful, just enough to make Michael uneasy. One day, Michael found an anonymous note slipped under his door at work. It was brief but clear: "You can run, but you can't hide from the truth." He looked around, confused, his confident smirk faltering for a moment. At home, Jenny noticed the change too. Michael was distracted, tense, less certain. He shrugged off her questions, but the cracks were starting to show. Stan watched it all unfold from a distance, a quiet satisfaction growing inside him. The message was clear: the past wasn't done with Michael. But Stan wasn't finished yet. He knew that if he pushed too hard too fast, Michael would shut down completely. So he paced himself, moving carefully, testing boundaries. One evening, Stan took a bolder step. He sent Michael an old photo from Mary's funeral, a picture that captured a rare moment of family unity. The note was simple: "This was the day we stood together. It's not too late." Michael stared at the photo, a flash of guilt crossing his face, quickly replaced by defensiveness. He tossed the photo onto the table and walked away. Stan's heart ached, but he didn't lose hope. He knew that the road to healing was never straight. Sometimes, you had to shake the foundations before rebuilding could begin. Meanwhile, the family started noticing the growing tension. Michael's siblings whispered about the change in their father, how the grief seemed to be fueling something fierce inside him. Jenny grew uneasy. Her birthday celebrations felt hollow, overshadowed by the invisible storm brewing between Michael and Stan. Late at night, when the house was quiet, Stan sat alone, writing down his next moves. He wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. His plan was no longer just about sending messages. It was about dismantling the comfortable life Michael had built, piece by piece, until he was forced to face the truth he'd tried so hard to ignore. The reckoning was underway. And Michael had no idea what was coming. The atmosphere in the family was thick with tension, like a storm waiting to break. Stan's quiet campaign against Michael wasn't a secret anymore. Rumors had started to spread among relatives, neighbors, and even some of Michael's friends. What had begun as a personal conflict was beginning to ripple outwards, drawing others into the orbit of pain and mistrust. Stan's other children had begun to sense the widening rift. His daughter, Lisa, called him one evening, her voice soft but worried. "Dad, this feud with Michael, it's tearing all of us apart. Can't you just let it go?" Stan's reply was steady but firm. "I'm not trying to tear us apart. I'm trying to hold us together. If Michael doesn't learn what family means, then nothing else matters." Lisa was silent for a moment, then sighed. "I get it, Dad. But it's hurting Mom's memory too. Can't revenge fix anything?" Stan closed his eyes, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He knew she was right, revenge was dangerous, and pride was a fragile thing. But the hurt Michael had caused wasn't something he could forget overnight. The funeral day was a wound that hadn't stopped bleeding. At family gatherings, the cold glances and whispered conversations made it clear how divided they had become. Some relatives sided with Stan, mourning Mary's loss and resenting Michael's absence. Others sympathized with Michael, understanding the pull of his new life and the pressures of loyalty to Jenny. Jenny herself was caught in the middle. Her birthday parties, once filled with joy and celebration, became fraught with awkwardness. Invitations were fewer, the laughter more forced. She tried to reach out to Stan, hoping to ease the tension, but he remained distant and unyielding. One afternoon, Stan's youngest son, David, confronted him quietly. "Dad, maybe it's time to stop. Mom wouldn't want this." Stan looked at David, the youngest and most gentle of his children. He wanted to believe that, but the ache in his chest told a different story. Despite the growing family fractures, Stan's determination didn't waver. He believed that sometimes, the harshest storms were necessary to clear the way for new growth. Meanwhile, Michael's life began to unravel in subtle but unmistakable ways. His work started suffering, missed deadlines, strained relationships with colleagues. The pressure of Stan's invisible campaign was wearing on him, even if he refused to admit it. At home, the tension between Michael and Jenny grew. The carefree celebrations became rare, replaced by quiet arguments and mounting frustrations. Jenny sensed the change but didn't know how to stop it. One night, after a particularly tense dinner, Michael exploded in anger. "I'm trying to live my life, Dad. Why won't you just leave me alone?" Stan met his son's glare evenly. "Because you walked away when it mattered the most." The words hung heavy in the air, a chasm widening between them. Neither knew if it could ever be bridged. As the family continued to fracture, the reckoning Stan had set in motion gathered momentum. What started as grief was now a powder keg of emotions: anger, betrayal, regret. And no one could say how it would end. The tension that had simmered beneath the surface was beginning to boil over. Stan's subtle maneuvers were no longer whispers in the shadows. They were storms striking at the very heart of Michael's life. The consequences of his father's quiet revenge started unfolding with a ruthless clarity, shaking the foundations Michael had built around himself. It began at work. Michael's once steady reputation was slipping through his fingers like sand. Missed deadlines piled up, colleagues' trust eroded, and whispered doubts about his professionalism spread through the office. The stress gnawed at him relentlessly, fraying his patience and clouding his judgment. What Michael didn't realize was how much of this disruption was orchestrated, a precise plan designed by Stan. One afternoon, Michael's boss called him into a meeting. The conversation was curt, laced with disappointment. "Michael, your performance has dropped significantly. If this continues, we'll have to reconsider your position." Michael's frustration boiled over. "I've been under a lot of stress lately," he snapped, though he kept the root cause buried deep within himself. At home, things were no better. Jenny watched with growing concern as her husband grew more distant and irritable. The once vibrant celebrations that had marked her birthdays now seemed to be memories from a different life. Arguments became more frequent and sharper. The warmth between them was cooling, replaced by a quiet bitterness. One evening, after another heated exchange, Jenny confronted Michael. "You're shutting me out. What's really going on?" Michael, exhausted and defensive, responded coldly. "It's nothing. Just work stress." But Jenny knew better. The cracks were deepening, and the pressure from Stan's invisible hand was suffocating him. Meanwhile, Stan intensified his efforts. He started uncovering truths, little secrets and mistakes Michael had long hoped would stay hidden. Quiet conversations with old friends, discreet reminders of forgotten debts, and subtle exposures began to surface. Stan was methodical. He wasn't seeking to destroy his son but to force him to confront the consequences of his choices. One evening, a package arrived at Michael's office, an anonymous letter detailing some questionable financial decisions he'd made, things that could jeopardize his career. The timing was perfect, the blow calculated. Michael's world was unraveling. The comfortable life he had built was cracking under pressure, and yet he refused to look directly at the cause. In the midst of this turmoil, Jenny pleaded with Stan during a rare phone call. "Please, stop this. It's tearing Michael apart. He needs family, not war." Stan's voice was steady but unyielding. "He needs to remember who he is. Sometimes, the hardest lessons are the most important." Michael, however, felt the weight of every one of Stan's moves. His frustration and helplessness boiled into anger. One night, he stormed out of the house, driving aimlessly through the empty streets, desperate to escape the suffocating reality closing in around him. Stan watched from his window, a mixture of sorrow and resolve in his eyes. He knew the road ahead was painful, but this was the reckoning that had to come. The family was at a breaking point, and there was no turning back. Jenny sat alone in their dimly lit living room, the echoes of the latest argument with Michael still ringing in her ears. The laughter and joy that once filled these walls on her birthdays seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by tension and silence. She stared at her reflection in the window, searching for the woman who had been so full of life, now shadowed by the cracks spreading through her marriage. She knew things had changed. Michael wasn't the same man she married. His eyes, once warm and confident, were now clouded with frustration and guilt. And beneath it all, Jenny sensed an invisible force unraveling the life they had tried to build together. Her thoughts drifted to Stan, the man she barely knew, but who had become the dark presence hovering over their lives. She blamed him for the growing rift between father and son. She was convinced that if Stan would just let go of his anger, Michael might find peace again. But as much as she wanted to reach out, Jenny felt powerless. Her attempts to talk to Michael were met with closed doors and colder silences. She was caught in a storm of emotions, love, fear, anger, and helplessness, all twisting inside her. One night, unable to bear the silence, Jenny called Stan. Her voice was trembling, but determined. "Stan, please, whatever this is between you and Michael, it's destroying us. Can't you stop this? For Mary's sake, for the family's sake." Stan's response was quiet but firm. "I'm doing this because I love Michael. Because I want him to remember what he lost. Sometimes love means making hard choices." Jenny felt tears prick her eyes. She realized this battle was bigger than her, deeper than anyone wanted to admit. And it was breaking them all. Meanwhile, Michael reached his breaking point. The pressure from work, the growing distance from Jenny, and the relentless push from Stan crushed him. One evening, after a day filled with setbacks and harsh words, he exploded in anger. "I'm tired, Jenny. Tired of everyone judging me, telling me what to do. I'm not a kid anymore." Jenny's eyes filled with tears. "We're not judging, Michael. We're hurting, because you're hurting us too." But Michael shut her out, retreating into himself. The next day, Stan confronted Michael directly for the first time in weeks. The conversation was heated, raw, and full of years of pain. "You walked away when it mattered most. You chose a party over your mother's funeral." Michael's voice cracked. "I had my reasons. It wasn't that simple." Stan shook his head. "Maybe not. But it was wrong." The words hung heavy between them. For the first time, Michael's defenses faltered. He looked at his father, not with anger, but with something new: pain, regret, and the faintest glimmer of understanding. Yet, the damage was done. The family stood at the edge of a cliff, and only time would say if they could find a way back. The atmosphere inside the house was electric, charged with years of unspoken grievances, hurt, and simmering anger finally reaching a breaking point. It was a cold evening, and outside, the wind howled against the windows as if mirroring the turmoil inside. Stan and Michael stood face to face in the dimly lit living room, the space once filled with laughter now turned into a battlefield of raw emotions. "Why, Michael?" Stan's voice was low, but every word was heavy with pain. "Why did you choose Jenny's birthday over your mother's funeral? Was she so insignificant to you?" Michael's jaw tightened. He looked away for a moment, struggling to find the right words. "It wasn't like that, Dad. You don't understand." "I don't." Stan stepped closer, his eyes blazing with a mix of fury and desperation. "I buried your mother with my own hands. I stood there alone because you decided a party was more important. And you expect me to just accept that?" Michael's expression crumbled. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I was trying to live my life, Dad. I wanted to honor Mom, but not at the cost of my own happiness." Stan's anger gave way to something deeper: heartbreak. "Your happiness shouldn't come at the expense of your family. We are the ones who should come first." Jenny, standing in the doorway, watched the exchange silently. Tears glistened in her eyes. She had never seen her husband so vulnerable, so raw. She stepped forward cautiously. "Maybe it's time we all stop fighting and try to heal." Michael looked at her, then back at his father. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to hurt you." Stan's face softened, but the years of pain didn't just vanish. "Sorry isn't enough, Michael. But maybe it's a start." In that moment, the walls that had separated them began to tremble. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the first step toward something neither of them could take alone. As the storm outside raged on, inside the family's storm had found a crack, a fragile opening for healing. But the road ahead was long, and the wounds ran deep. Stan knew the hardest part was yet to come, rebuilding what had been broken, piece by piece. The weeks that followed the intense confrontation between Stan and Michael were filled with uneasy silences and tentative attempts at rebuilding a fractured relationship. The house, once thick with unspoken resentment, began to breathe differently. There was space now for small, fragile moments of understanding. Stan found himself waking up earlier, not just to face the day, but to prepare for the difficult conversations ahead. He realized that anger alone wouldn't mend the broken ties. It was time to try something different. To reach Michael not with punishment, but with compassion. One afternoon, Stan decided to visit Michael's workplace unannounced. He knew Michael was under immense pressure, and he wanted to show up not as an accuser but as a father willing to listen. Michael was surprised to see him. The initial tension in the room was thick, but Stan simply said, "I'm here to listen. No judgments." For the first time in months, Michael let his guard down. He spoke about the guilt that had been eating him alive, the frustration of balancing his new family with the legacy of his mother. He confessed how much he resented himself for missing the funeral, yet how trapped he felt in the life he'd created with Jenny. Stan listened quietly, nodding. He shared stories of Mary, her strength, her love for Michael, and how she always believed in forgiveness. That afternoon marked a shift. It was still far from a full reconciliation, but the walls between father and son were crumbling. Back at home, Jenny noticed the change too. Michael seemed less burdened, more open. Their conversations grew deeper, filled with honesty rather than avoidance. Stan and Michael began exchanging occasional calls and messages, small check-ins that hinted at the possibility of rebuilding trust. The family gathered again for a quiet dinner, the atmosphere lighter than it had been in months. Lisa smiled, sensing the healing beginning to take root. Yet, Stan knew better than anyone that scars don't fade quickly. There would be setbacks, misunderstandings, and moments of pain. But for the first time, hope was no longer a distant dream. It was real. As Stan looked across the table at Michael and Jenny, he felt a cautious optimism. The past could not be erased, but perhaps the future could still be written. The reckoning had come and gone. Now, the true work of healing had begun. The fragile threads of reconciliation stretched tentatively between Stan and Michael, but the family still bore the deep scars of the past months. The wounds were raw, etched into every glance and word, but the will to heal had sparked something powerful in them all. Stan knew that to truly rebuild, they needed more than occasional talks and cold dinners. They needed to confront the past together, to share memories, to grieve openly, and to begin the slow process of forgiveness. One weekend, Stan invited Michael, Jenny, Lisa, and David to the old family home, the place where Mary's presence still lingered in every room. It was a quiet house filled with echoes, but also the roots of their shared history. That afternoon, they gathered in the living room, a circle of fractured souls seeking to mend. Stan began by sharing stories of Mary, her kindness, her dreams, the small moments that had made her extraordinary. He spoke with a voice heavy with emotion, reminding them all of the woman who had bound them together. Michael listened intently, his eyes glistening. He shared his own memories, the times he had taken for granted, the regrets he carried. Jenny joined, speaking of the struggles she and Michael had faced, the distance that grief and anger had created. Lisa and David offered their support, their voices soft but resolute. It wasn't an easy conversation. Tears flowed freely, and sometimes words faltered. But with each story, each shared pain, the walls between them crumbled a little more. They talked late into the night, revisiting old wounds but also planting seeds of hope. For the first time in months, the house felt alive, not with conflict, but with the tentative beginnings of healing. Stan realized that forgiveness was not a single act but a journey they would walk together, step by painful step. By the end of the evening, they made a silent promise, to face the future as a family, no matter how hard the road. Outside, the wind had calmed, and the night sky was clear. Inside, a family wounded but not broken found their way back to each other. The sun rose gently over the quiet neighborhood, casting warm light through the curtains of the old family home. For the first time in a long while, Stan woke up feeling a fragile sense of peace. The long, painful journey of grief, anger, and estrangement was beginning to give way to something new, a chance to rebuild. The family had gathered the night before, sharing stories and tears, but also laughter, tentative, yet real. That gathering marked a turning point, a collective decision to heal and move forward together. Stan stood in the kitchen preparing breakfast, the familiar routine grounding him. Michael entered quietly, a hint of awkwardness in his step, but also a willingness to bridge the gap. Jenny followed, her eyes soft, hopeful. "Morning," Stan said simply, a small smile tugging at his lips. Michael nodded. "Morning, Dad." They didn't rush into heavy talks or forced apologies. Instead, they shared the simple moments, coffee cups clinking, the scent of pancakes in the air, the quiet comfort of family presence. Later that day, they took a walk through the neighborhood, revisiting places filled with memories of Mary. Each step was a tribute, a reminder that even though she was gone, her love still shaped their lives. As they walked, Michael spoke softly. "I'm sorry for what I did, or didn't do. I know it hurt you." All of you. His voice cracked with honesty. Stan looked at his son, pride and forgiveness shining through his eyes. It's not easy to forgive, Michael. But I believe we can start again. Jenny squeezed Michael's hand, tears in her eyes. We'll get through this. Together. The days that followed were not without challenges. Old wounds sometimes reopened, and frustrations lingered. But the family faced each moment with a newfound commitment, to listen, to understand, and to support. Stan and Michael began working on small projects around the house, repairing what time and neglect had worn down. Each nail hammered, each wall painted, became a metaphor for the mending of their relationship. One evening, as the family gathered around the fireplace, Stan raised his glass. To Mary, the heart of this family. And to us, for finding our way back. Glasses clinked softly. The warmth of the fire matched the warmth growing between them. The reckoning was over, but the story was far from finished. It was a story of forgiveness, resilience, and love, a story of family. And as they looked ahead, they knew that while the past would always be a part of them, it would no longer define them. They were ready for a new beginning. Thank you for spending this time with us. If the story moved you, even a little, let us know. Drop a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after the screen fades. Your support means more than you know.